Hello and welcome back to the Hope at Work podcast. With me again is Brett Waikart. He is the co-founder and CEO of Skillfully. This is the second time he's been on the podcast. You are the very first return guest, Brett, so welcome back.
What's up, Marcus? Proud to be. I can't believe I haven't scared you off yet.
Not yet. What I actually want to do, Brett, is really pick up where we left off. And you don't have to have listened to the previous episode to get this one, but what we talked about previously was the fact that the rules of work are changing. And so where I want to go from there is, if the rules of work are changing, how do we make sure that the new rules, that the new norms that come about are human-centric? And I know that's a broad topic. We can take that in a variety of directions. But what it feels to me like is there's a lot of experts out there talking about what the new world of work is going to look like. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of answers right now as to how do we ensure that the new rules and the new norms and the new technologies end up being human-centric. So where do we go from here, Brett? Because I really don't feel like I feel like there's way more questions than answers. So where do we start?
Sure. Let's start with a premise that we think is important. In this new world of work, this world being defined as when AI really forcefully enters the workforce, what we think is a very important premise to accept and to discuss up front is that AI will absolutely be impactful to the average worker. But what we believe deeply is that AI is going to disrupt at the task level, not at the title level.
Okay.
Practically what that means is that, no, you will not lose your job wholesale because an AI-powered robot or an agent or a chatbot is suddenly able to do everything that you can do. What will happen, inevitably, is that AI will disrupt at the task level. So the tasks, the workflows, the interactions that make up your day as a worker in whatever sector, in whatever company you're in, those tasks will inevitably change. And the composition of those tasks, the composition of your job will change faster and more frequently than at any time before.
Okay.
So that's not something to be afraid of. I need to say this right off the top. This is where every doomer scenario, this is where all of the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt all start from. They take that as a premise and say, oh no, we got to run for the hills. This is terrible. Let's stop this progress. This is a unqualified good thing for the worker, and let's get into that. But that premise is an important one to just center as our starting point.
Okay. So let me ask you this then, because there's a lot of discussion about skills, right? And there seems to be almost an oversimplification. Well, we just need to make sure we're constantly reskilling and upskilling and whatever, acronym you want to use related to all of that. How do you relate tasks with skills, and what should we be doing about them?
It's almost like you and I have talked about this before. Look, that is the question that matters. The last 5 or 10 years, for that time period, the term skills-based hiring has been very du jour. It's been very popular. Every organization is moving towards becoming a skills-first organization. That is all good and well. That is very well-intentioned. That is a step forward, but it's not enough. So we see platforms out there. You see ATS and HRM systems like an Eightfold and their peers that have gone from a job infrastructure, your org chart with just a bunch of titles. That's how you organize and represent your workforce. They've taken a step and added what we refer to as a skills architecture. That's basically taking the org chart and painting it with a different shade of paint. You're saying that it's not just the titles that matter. It is the skills that are relevant for that job. That's what we need to add to it. And so what ends up happening is you have a laundry list, a shopping list of, for somebody to be a manager in this particular organization or in this vertical, they need skills A through Z, and list them out, tags. Like this is what you see on LinkedIn when you're asked to endorse somebody for a particular skill. Okay, the advantage of that is that it's very easy. It's very straightforward to methodically go through a job and say, well, what skills are relevant? Cool, let's do that. Let's add that as a new data field, a new tag within our Workday instance or our 8 folder, whatever it may be. The problem is that a skills architecture alone is not enough to be actionable, to be useful for somebody who's either thinking about hiring new members, new employees into that company, or an HR manager who's thinking about career advancement, thinking about internal mobility. Just simply knowing the what is a good start. It's moving in the right direction, but you can't make a decision off of this. It's in a certain sense resume speak all over again. It's do you or don't you have a skill? What the important next step is, and this is where a lot of companies in the space, this is where they're moving, this is what they're focusing on, which is a good thing, is then going from, we start with the jobs architecture, we layered on a skills architecture. Now the final step is a task architecture. How are those skills being used? Instead of asking what skills are relevant, now you start asking how are those skills used in the performance of that specific job, of those tasks, of those workflows. You can do some really interesting things here when you ask the how question, because what we can start doing is when we look at how is a skill being used to perform a particular task, we can start looking at, well, how proficient is somebody in that task? How successful are they navigating those types of tasks? How can those tasks either be automated or not be automated with a tool like an AI agent to come in and perform some portion of that? The how question, which is really, really the point of that task architecture you're talking about, that's what opens us up to all of these wonderful new decision signals, a new map, a new workflow for thinking about how to build a workforce that is human-centric but highly effective and highly efficient. That's where all the good stuff starts.
Okay, so I'm following you. So you started at kind of the jobs level and you said, hey, let's kind of just, I like how you kind of said, but let's repaint over that with skills, and then we can paint over that with tasks, but we're still just painting over things. So a kind of two-part question, Brett. It sounds like maybe we need to start over from an organizational perspective. I know you've talked in the past about org charts, something that we're all familiar with that have been around for a long time. Do those need to be taken and put in the bin in favor of something else? And the second part of that question is, are brand new companies that are starting today, that are building everything they do on an AI foundation, are they going to be like way out ahead of the larger organizations that can't just throw everything in the bin? Like, what's going to happen? How will this sort itself out?
Sure. Let's start with your first question. This is not necessarily a burn it all down and start from the very beginning kind of scenario. Okay. I can hear the panic of every HR manager in your audience. He's like, what have I been doing for the last 5-10 years? That's not the case. The good news here is that there are tools, there are services. This is one of the first things that my company Skillfully does when we start working with an employer. The translation from that skills architecture to the task architecture, that is a translation that you can do from existing systems.
Okay.
Now, where you end up, the structure that that results from taking that step from skills to tasks, that might not resemble the same org chart that we've known for 50, 100 years. It might be different, but that is not a bad thing in itself. The important thing to say is that every step that's been taken so far, refining that org chart, figuring out what skills are relevant for a role, those are all necessary steps on a spectrum. That's a direction you are heading, and then you just need to make sure you don't stop before that last step. So the good news is that, yes, there is hope. There is a very clear pathway to go from a skills architecture, which everyone has, that's a very popular framework to start from, into these tasks, which allows us to do all of these really interesting things in the age of AI. The question you're asking about, hey, for let's compare new, young, nascent companies who were born in the age of AI versus those incumbents that have kind of weathered many seasons, many different of these transitions from one architecture to the next. Is there an inherent advantage or not? I would say that there absolutely is an advantage, no matter what. If you have less technical debt, less what we would think of as organizational or informational debt, yeah, it's a more straightforward process to clean that up. But the main liability for, let's call them legacy companies, let's call them incumbents, folks who have been doing this for years, if not decades, the biggest challenge, the biggest transition that we need to get those companies, those employers to make is recognizing that they have been working off of a single type of data for the last 50 years. Largely, it's self-reported data. So if we look at the information that a company uses when they organize their ATS, their applicant tracking system, a lot of that information on the employer side of that dashboard, of that tool, is information that's being scraped from incoming resumes, incoming applications. What that program is relying on is that whoever shows up to the front door with an application looking for a job, that self-description is accurate. The problem is that data that they start with, that self-attested data, it's hard to get rid of. That data lingers with that person's, when they become a new hire, with their employee card. That user then is making more attestations about the skills they have, what they develop in learning and development. The current system, the incumbent system, the legacy world is reliant on self-attested, really secondhand data. And that's what everything is built off of. The real advantage for new companies today is that they can more quickly adopt a new form of data that AI allows for. Instead of having to rely on how somebody describes themselves or their qualifications or their journey throughout their career, what we can now do with these AI tools is we can use this AI tool set to be able to directly observe somebody's skills in action. We do it as part of the application flow. So instead of submitting a resume, we want you to step into these virtual worlds, these digital twins of the job you're applying to as an applicant, demonstrate your skills and abilities. That data flows through. We integrate with every ATS, every HRM platform. That demonstrated data becomes now the most important form of data for those employers. You see this a lot there's a ton of tools that for engineering hires will sit in and actually watch someone's code base and analyze the quality of work, where they're strong, where they're weak. But again, looking at demonstrated skill data to be able to make decisions about, well, how do we form teams in the future? How do we do advancement? How do we do performance evaluation? That new type of data, we shouldn't underestimate the impact, the benefit that comes from building your system off firsthand observations this versus secondhand descriptions. That is where the advantage lies. And so legacy companies, they can adopt new tools to begin using more of this observed, demonstrated data. But those who don't, those who just stay grounded in their legacy tools, are reliant on that secondhand descriptions, those are going to be the companies that struggle. Those are going to be the companies that adapt and kind of advance slower than their peers.
Okay. That helps. I appreciate you taking the time to describe that. So let's come back to this concept of human centricity and the way that we're designing these new systems and these new technologies. You talked about kind of the old way is self-reported, self-attested data. It made me think of something, Brett. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Velocity network that's using blockchain for kind of some form of credentialing. Have you heard of that?
I have.
Okay, good. So for those who haven't, it's basically saying, why don't we use blockchain to say, hey, I can validate Marcus went to the University of Kansas back in the 1990s and got this degree, and that doesn't change over time. So I can validate that one time, and that follows me. So the reason I bring that up is you talk about self-reporting and self-attestation. Do you think that the data relative to me and my skills and abilities should be self-sovereign? Is that mine? Should it follow me? Like because again, when we talk about human centricity and the way that we design this, is that relevant to this conversation? And because that's one of the things that Velocity, the network talks a lot about is you're taking that with you. And that's, it's almost like your own career wallet, if you will, that you can then go to the next employer and say, hey, I've already verified all this stuff.
I think that is absolutely the direction we're going in. I think that while we're in this transition period, where we're going from self-attested, described data to a more objective, demonstrated style of observed data, I think it's going to be hard to implement successfully. And let me go a little bit further with this. This is something the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is really leading the conversation on, this idea of a digital skills wallet that, to your point, is your property as the job seeker, as the employee. And it's a wonderful concept. It's great. The principle of it is sound. This should be your data that you have control over. You should understand as a job seeker how that employer is seeing you, how you're perceived. You should be able to be in full control of that data so that it's only shared with those employers or those partners that you care to share it with. Those are all wonderful virtues of this kind of self-sovereign skills wallet that is the property that is owned by the job seeker. Mm-hmm. The problem is that effort has been handicapped by a rush to implement, by companies that are maybe less committed to those principles and are more interested in pragmatically, selfishly owning the rails that wallet is delivered on, lives on. You see this a lot in terms of the credentialing movement. And this was really very popular 4 or 5 years ago. But this is the Degrees, the Credlys, the platforms that they will offer some form of a digital badge, a stackable badge that you can collect. And it's, a badge is for a program you went to or a conference you attended or a skill you demonstrated. But the problem there is that all of those companies are very motivated to be the singular owner of that system. The Chamber of Commerce is coming at this as just like, hey, this is a public good. This should be something that exists for every citizen to be able to have open access to. Those companies are for profit. They're doing this because they want to own that market. What happened in those last 5 years is that those platforms, in a rush to own the universe, to be able to have a credential on their platform for literally everything you can imagine, well, be careful wishing for that because you might just get it. Those platforms went too far. They created credentials for everything under the sun. If you, unfortunately, because that credential market got so diluted, because it got so overwhelmed by badges for every little thing, there's no standard that was kept. And so now in an employer's eyes, that universe of badging is just noise. What we want to get to, and this is something, again, that my team and I think very deeply about, is, well, what's the ultimate point of what will be put into that skills wallet? Well, the ultimate point is you want something that carries weight, that is recognized by the employer. The ultimate arbiter of your education, of your skills, is the employer. They will pay you wages in exchange for your demonstrated, your applied skills. Mm-hmm. So you need to keep a bar where you don't credential everything. You pick and choose. You think about what's the right framework for what skill, what designation, what qualifies as proficient. The world today does not have a single standard. And because of that, there is not a universally available credentialing solution. It's impossible to have just because there's too much noise. We can talk about, I think, our answer. I think talking our own book, selfishly, the right answer is to keep a very, very high bar for what a badge signifies. Unfortunately, when you're a company that makes money by issuing more badges and having a wider portfolio of what qualifies for one of your widgets, one of your units of production, a badge, the incentives are misaligned and the system just is broken. And so I think we need to rebuild that system before the idea of a self-sovereign skills wallet becomes feasible.
Yeah. You see similar challenges in the world of healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Where there were a lot of perverse incentives for a fee-for-service model. And obviously the challenge is not having a single, record for your health-related data. And so, again, a lot of parallels with the world of work and the world of healthcare, similar challenges. Okay, I want to maybe switch gears a little bit. Let's assume for the moment, fast forward, 5 years, probably not even that far. And we see tremendous change in terms of the adoption of these new technologies. And we see humanity become incredibly productive and efficient. So coming back to this concept of human centricity, if we see exponential increases in productivity and efficiency, what should change in terms of how the world of work is structured? And I'm going to lead you down a path and see where you go from there. If we become incredibly productive, Brett, should we be sharing the wealth? Because my concern is what we're going to do is make a few organizations and individuals incredibly rich. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for capitalism, but should we instead maybe be distributing some of that wealth in the form of, hey, Brett, the 4-day week is here. You only have to work 4 days now because we're so ultra productive. That's the new norm in society. Again, it's kind of a broad question, but I'm curious, how do we make the future more human-centric and share the wealth?
This is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Indeed FutureWorks. Ryan and I attended the conference last year, and we created a limited series for Indeed where we talked to their customers. Great stories around TA and how they use Indeed to the max. So check it out. It's just Indeed FutureWorks 2024. You could search for it wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks.
I love these podcasts. It gives us the chance to take these little bites out of societal level, world-changing issues. Let me answer that in two pieces, because I think there are two ideas that are worth unpacking and spending a little time thinking about. So let's put ourselves in this world that seems inevitable. We're actually already in it, where each week, each month, there are new tools being created, more AI-driven vendors, products, tools that are set to help automate away some type of task. Again, let's go back to this premise that we started with. AI is going to disrupt at the task level, not the title level. And so let's think about somebody who's a content marketer. The point of these tools, good product design for an AI tool, an AI SaaS product that's going to be used by some worker to make them more efficient. The design principle is to have that tool fade into the background. When you find a tool that can automate a particular task, the beauty of this is that that task can be completed by your tool in the background. When you're asleep, you're out to dinner, or you're just doing some other kind of work that's not yet automatable. Good AI tools should fade into the background, should disappear. The problem today is that a lot of companies, or the market in general, hasn't yet hit that mark consistently. If we think about the type of AI that we're all most familiar with, it's a conversational chatbot. You open up OpenAI, you open up Claude, you open up Gemini. And the very first form of interacting with these models is conversational. And that's great. That's natural. That's how we speak to one another in a way that helps speed adoption. But the problem is that you're still rate constrained. You're still limited by you needing to sit at a keyboard, typing or speaking your information and having a dialogue. And maybe it's going to come up with some answers in that process, but that interaction pattern, that is a starting point. That is not where these tools are going to go. So what we want to acknowledge is that right now, AI, for a lot of professionals who have tried these tools, it is not the time saver. It is not the liberator of their workday. that it can be in the future, because that interaction pathway is still archaic. It's still just the initial model of you type a response, the model responds back to you.
Right.
Now, just because that's where we are today does not mean that that's where we're going to be in a very, very short time period, not years, but months. What we're seeing today is across all of the different types of work, these vertical products are beginning to demonstrate the ability to be taught once, to be shown how a task should be done, and then they can run in the background. Then they can quite literally take that bit of work and say, cool, thanks, boss, I got it. Let me get over to this other piece. For a worker, for somebody in the workforce, the skill being exercised is delegation. You're teaching these tools how to do some form of your work, and then that work is no longer part of your stack of tasks that you're responsible for, that you're putting time into each day. You're now editing the output, not authoring the first draft, and that's transformative. So when you think about, hey, how do these current crop of AI tools, how does that lead to a more human-centric type of work? Well, it's really, the answer to that question is really buried in that dynamic that we're just describing. It's saying that, hey, the current iteration, folks who are using these tools, we see this all the time, where there is an AI screener of resumes that maybe sits in your ATS. Well, the workflow for somebody who's actually looking to hire off of that data is they still need to review every single resume. Those resume filters are looking for little differences in keyword matching, and unfortunately, because everyone's writing their resume with ChatGPT to be perfectly keyword matched, it doesn't deliver those time savings. Now, let's think about how an AI tool like Skillfully might do that a little bit differently. We, for instance, want to look at a different data set, that demonstrated skills we were talking about earlier, to identify who is the best talent for a recruiter to interview or to hire. We're using AI, we're applying it to generate a new, novel, more precise, more actionable data set. And that work of observing demonstrated skill, I can do that. We can do that in the background. A user, our customer sets up the digital twin of that role, the simulations, that's kind of the early filter for that role. And then that person can go to sleep. They can go take a vacation. They can come back, and we can have had 100,000 applicants go through those simulations. You can come back to a stack ranked list of exactly the most qualified, highest skill applicants for a job. So now you as a recruiter don't need to spend your time in a tool. You don't need to spend that time reviewing resumes, cover letters, whatever the old way was. You as the recruiter get to reclaim that time and spend that time doing what the AI agent can't. Building a real relationship, building rapport, understanding, having that interpersonal interaction with these applicants that we've been able to identify, or that you've been able to identify. That's a perfect example about how a recruiter is not replaced in this process. If anything, that recruiter becomes more integral, more important to that process, because they can spend more of their time doing what they do best, that human relationship building. That's such a critical part of hiring. You see this in law, you see this in medicine, you see this in all of these different areas. The types of tasks that AI is very good at automating away are the tasks that do not rely on human interaction. Those are the tasks that focus on data analysis, filling out surveys, writing content, heads down in your computer work. The goal here is to get back to your point, Marcus, of a more human-centric world of work. That is the direction we're going in, but we need to have these tools, these AI tools that are on the market today, take that next step forward in product design, so that they are doing a good job of removing those tasks from someone's day-to-day, so that they can reclaim that time and practice a different way of work. Mm-hmm. That's the first point. I have a second one about your next point. You were talking a little bit about, hey, you're really asking the question of redistribution.
That's right.
So these tools, there is a reading of AI's influence in the world of work. I don't think this is the correct reading. I don't think this is the only reading, but there is a perspective that, oh, cool. AI is essentially a tool to replace human labor. If you own a company, you have two forms of costs. You have your human labor, your human capital, and then you have the financial capital and the product. And, we've thought about this as labor versus machinery. And if we're able to use AI to remove all of the labor, if we were to automate away all of these jobs, and you could take your workforce, Scrooge McDuck could take his workforce down from 1,000 people to 10. Great. Well, Scrooge gets to keep all of those salaries that he no longer needs to pay. That is the narrative. We're lampooning it a little bit, but that is the storyline. And then as the math goes, well, you as the owner of the company, you are still reaping these rewards. You are still earning all of the value, but you only need to pay out a fraction of that value in wages. That is an oversimplified version of the story, and I don't think that's a very hopeful story. I think that actually, that's a version of the story that discredits, that demeans, that infantilizes the individual worker. It renders the worker helpless to this wave of new technology. That is not the fact. That is not how this works. I think, and this is described as the abundance agenda versus the scarcity agenda. There's some wonderful work about this. We are very much believers in the abundance agenda. Instead of these AI tools looking at you as a fixed list of tasks, of workflows that AI can just eat away at, can start basically taking away, what that ignores, what it oversimplifies, it doesn't consider the fact that as every task is taken away from a worker, they are now freed up to reuse that time, to reclaim it for something that drives and creates more value for themselves, makes them, that worker, a more valuable member of their employer's workforce. I think what's going to happen here, and this is why I think a reframe of this narrative is so important, because it gets to, well, how do we prepare people for this new world, for this new future, or this new era of work? I think what's going to happen is the American worker is going to have these tasks taken off of their plate, those that they can automate away, and they will be liberated to be able to then actually take on a more entrepreneurial approach to work, where they have the agency to think about, well, how can I use that time that I no longer need to spend in these spreadsheets, in these tools? How can I use that to create more value for myself, to get that promotion, to be able to more directly improve the value of the business they're in? There is nothing about the current structure of the workforce that prevents a worker from doing that. I think that's actually going to be the assumption. The only limiter, the constraint in this world, it's not that Scrooge McDuck wants to hold down the worker and doesn't want to let them go off and do other more higher order things. The limiter is education. It is essentially using forums like yours, using platforms like your podcast, Marcus, to talk about this new world of work where workers will have more agency. They will have more opportunity to self-determine that higher level of value that they're able to provide. I think this is a fascinating conversation. I want to pause in a second here, but this opens up the world of work where folks can use their time to take on more projects within the company. I think it'll become much more normalized for folks to take some of their time and go to the contingent labor marketplace and to be able to do some gig work, not driving an Uber, not delivering for DoorDash, but actually going to these organizations and where their skills are most highly valued. You will be able in 5 years and 10 years time to be able to fill your time with those tasks for which you are most qualified. That is the abundance agenda. And I think this Scrooge McDuck narrative is just so lazy, but it's so prevalent. I think everyone's afraid of these things because they don't know what's coming next, and that's an easy thing to reach for. But if people resign to being afraid of some coming transition, some coming wave, that's wasted time when they could be preparing for this new world where trying these tools, understanding how to leverage them, how to delegate them to be able to be more effective in the workplace, that is what they should be spending their time on, because they'll have the opportunity to improve their earnings, improve the value that they drive by the use of that. And that opportunity is coming If he catches you flat-footed, then that's going to be the problem. Those will be the folks that are left behind.
Brett, I've been doing this podcast for a couple of seasons now, and I think you just captured, better than anyone, ethos and the desire of what we're trying to communicate, which is we have a lot to look forward to, and there's going to be liberation, to
Absolutely.
use your term, as a result of technology. And not trying to be naive and Pollyanna about it. Will there be bumps in the road? Yes. Are there difficulties and challenges associated with this transition? Absolutely. But I love what you just described, and I'm glad that we can debunk to some degree the Scrooge McDuck narrative, as you named it. I like that. So
I hope that catches on. That would be great. That would be a wonderful outcome from this conversation if we end up hearing that on some talking head show.
Totally.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, I love it.
Look out for that.
Not a whole lot of time left, but I do want to just ask you really quickly. A lot of us can't attend all the conferences out there. There's a lot of great ones. And it's always nice to be able to learn from other people. I know you attended Transform in Vegas recently. Curious to know if any kind of themes bubbled to the surface that you saw that are intriguing, that again are kind of relevant to the conversation that we've had here today.
Yeah. Shout out to the Transform team. They do a wonderful job. That was an excellent event. This is our first year going, but we will be lifelong attendees. Transform is one of the larger HR tech conferences in the world, and it focuses really heavily on bringing together practitioners with technology vendors. And it's an excellent opportunity for CHROs, for hiring managers and executives, for practitioners to be able to just take a pulse of where the market is, what tools are being built. You get everybody in one big room in Las Vegas, and it turns out that you get a pretty good snapshot of what the market is doing. I found it profoundly interesting. You have a couple of very, very clear trends that emerge. You have seen a very real clustering, a very real convergence of young tech companies. And these are tech companies that they've built an interesting product. They may or may not have fully brought it to market and fully validated that this is a product that the employer really wants and needs. And that's going to be an interesting question. But you see a ton of tools that step forward with some version of the value prop. We will automate some part of your job, recruiter. We will take resume review. We will take screening interviews. We'll take that out of your hand, and we are going to insert a chat bot or creepy removed voice to actually run the interview. And it's interesting. It's fun. It's fascinating. It's a little bit dystopian when you get see some of this in action. I think what's really interesting is that you see that now because those tools are technically viable. The time it takes for somebody to, if you're fluent, if you're comfortable with deploying LLMs in the tech stack of a product, using that as a building block, as opposed to what would be considered just fixed lines of code, deterministic code. An LLM is stochastic, it's responsive, it's dynamic. If you're comfortable building products with those tools, then these use cases are within reach. The question that's going to get answered in the coming months is, okay, those products are viable to make, to build, to deploy, and get funded, because let's be honest, everything that has a .ai website is kitty litter to the VC community. So there's money to get these things ready to go. I think that there's a very real tension, though, that's been unresolved. I think that just because all of these tools exist, I don't think that there's definitive proof that that's what hiring managers want to use. And it gets back to our conversation of, okay, those tools are using the data that a company has today, the resume, the cover letter, the application data, the self-attested data that we talked about at the very top of the call. The value proposition for those tools is that, hey, hiring manager, I am going to take the job of resume review away. You won't have to do it anymore. Let me do that. Let me run the virtual interviews. You're basically taking this AI agent, this AI product, and you're trotting it out there as cannon fodder. Like, let me do that terrible, miserable work and I'll process this, and don't worry, then you can jump in. And that's troubling in two ways. One, it assumes that the value these tools can create is the replacement value of the time that an HR manager no longer needs to spend in this. A lot of these companies explicitly say, hey, CHRO, you're going to need to hire less folks to interview, boots on the ground recruiters. Isn't that great? Okay, well, that does not acknowledge what we've been talking about. That doesn't give primacy to the need for a human-centric workforce. And that's a problem. That's a real tension that we'll see if that is a value proposition that employers will go for or not. I don't think the jury's out, or jury's in either direction. The other piece that's really, really troubling is any recruiter today who has spent any amount of time going through the inbound applications they receive, the resumes, anybody who's been on a virtual interview, they know firsthand just how corrupted that data is. Everyone knows that everyone's read an unending pile of resumes in that creepy chat GPT voice. Furthermore, I've done it. We've all seen it. It's awful. And the answer there isn't processing more of those resumes. It's stepping outside of that. And like the same thing can go with the screening interviews. Every single recruiter has had the experience of asking an applicant a question, and the applicant goes, interesting. Let me think about that. Hold on. And then as if they just got struck by a bolt of lightning, all of a sudden they launch into a 3-minute monologue about exactly all of the things they've ever done to answer this question. And it's because, again, they have these Gen AI tools that are giving pre-scripted, canned responses. They're listening to the question, and instead of answering a question in ChatGPT, it's proposing your best answer.
Wow.
It's wild, but the answer isn't doing more of that old way of doing things. It's introducing a better solution. It's moving that AI arms race forward to get a more accurate view of somebody's ability. A lot of these tools suffer from garbage in, garbage out. If you're reliant on an AI resume or an AI written response to a question, then you're still not getting to the heart of the question. Who is the best talent? Who is the best hire for a job? You're just asking, well, who can answer this question the best?
Right.
And that's equally as absurd as Scrooge McDuck. It's such a funny world that we live in, but I think those are the open questions right now that the tech community, the founder community, is very actively wrestling with. Everyone's well-intentioned. Everyone will get to a better answer than we have today, but we're still in that in-between times for sure.
Yeah. Well, so to your point, there's some low-hanging fruit that I think a lot of these organizations are going after immediately. And then there's a lot harder stuff that's going to be tackled. I know you are tackling a lot of harder stuff. I think, what was JFK that said about sending people to the moon? It's not like we're doing it because it's easy. We're doing it because
it's hard.
Yeah. So I'm glad that there are people like you out there pursuing the hard stuff. Also want to point out something that you said that I don't know if everybody picked up on, but at one point you said, this isn't coming in the next few years. This is coming in the next few months.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to recognize that you and I aren't talking about these, crazy ideas that are going to be here in a few years and you've got time to figure it out. It's time right now to start figuring this stuff out. So I hope people realize that and have that sense of urgency. So
Marcus, I want to hold the mirror back up to you as well. You and I had a conversation originally, like, hey, do we want to put this podcast, this series under a different name, or do we want to stick it Hope At? And I've been reflecting on this, and I'm so glad that you have remained true to the branding of this space as Hope At Work. I think something that is a very necessary reminder. The goal for all of this work is to create that more hopeful vision of a human-centric workforce, of a workplace. I think that in a rush to create new tools, to use this new technology in all of the cool ways that it's possible, it's very easy to lose sight of that destination that we all want to get to. We want to get to that world of abundance, of self-sovereignty, of the ability to reclaim time that would otherwise be spent doing things that sap energy. And we want to use that to work at a higher order of task. And I think that message gets lost. I think that is a huge part of the AI community that's obsessed, that loves talking about, well, we just cleared this new hurdle on the way to AGI or super intelligent. Like that becomes something that us dorks in San Francisco love talking about and get all excited about. And thank God I have a wife who loves me, because I don't know if I'd be able to find somebody who can tolerate that otherwise. But but I think though that's the easy first reaction. That's the easy knee-jerk reaction to the current moment of, oh, look at all the cool things we can build. What really matters is to say, well, look at all the progress that we can make towards that more hopeful world of abundance, world of human-centric work, where we use these tools to be a little bit more human, to lean into what makes us human and what we enjoy. Like that is the world that's possible. And just thank you for centering that and really holding that constant as the goal. I'm really happy to be a part of this with you. Yeah,
me too. I'm so glad that you can see the importance of that narrative. And sure. I think we've really actually done a pretty decent job in this episode of defining how some of these changes can actually create a more hopeful future and a more human-centric future. So really enjoyed the conversation, Brett. Thank you again for joining. Looking forward to additional conversations with you in the near future.
So much fun. I love this, Marcus. This is the best part of my week. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brett.